So that you have corroboration on that part of the story, Larry.
Well, the interesting part is there's more corroboration on the story than the media has ever put out there. It's just they don't want to put it out there. But anyway, let's get back to the description of what took place, and then I will touch on the new standard in the media. I began to perform oral sex on him, basically. It was at that time that he had reached into his pocket and pulled out a glass cylinder pipe with a little packet of nice little, what I would consider freshly cooked crack rocks, and he had intentionally told me that he was going to smoke a little bit, that it actually made him harder during sex, which, from my experience, very few actually get more aroused from smoking. I have known a couple that did, but most of them actually, it tends to have the opposite effect, but who am I to argue with somebody? He asked me to hand the lighter that was over in the cup holder off to my right. I'm actually in the floorboard facing him. He's actually in the back seat. After that, I proceed to perform oral sex on him. He is the one that actually lifts his body up and, moves his trousers down to where they're not just, opened.
To all the listeners out there, you be the judge and you decide for yourself on this one, but Gloria Allred held a press conference at a very Tony private club here in Chicago. She presented Sharon Bialik, and Sharon Bialik gave an account of riding in a car, in the backseat of a car, with Herman Cain, and Herman Cain reaching for her genitals, and Herman Cain pushing himself into her chest and doing all these other things. So for those of you wondering why it's valid to hear your tale of being in the back of a car with Barack Obama and genitals being touched, well, Gloria Allred started the trend on this, and she made this perfectly okay by having that press conference with Sharon Bialik. So, Larry, more power to you. I say, continue on with the story, but I do want people to know that's why we're doing this, because we're following the lead of Gloria Allred, and she's such a distinguished citizen who has now made this now news. So, please continue.
Okay. Well, actually, Sharon Bialik's description of what she alleges took place between her and Herman Cain is almost verbatim for what the description that I gave in 2008 when discussing my allegations with none other than Gloria Allred on February 22nd of 2008. And I think people need to go back and actually look at the transcripted version of my description of everything that took place back in 1999 in Chicago in the back of a limo. And if you put it side by side with everything that Sharon Bialik came out standing next to Gloria Allred and said, you will notice that the similarities are somewhat troubling, to say the least. And I've also put up the documentation showing the phone records between myself and Gloria Allred in the event that she ever tries to say that we never had a conversation. But basically, it's interesting because I did perform oral sex on him in the back of the limo. There is a section in the description where I make it clear that he actually does start caressing the back of my head. He did not literally pull my head into his crotch as is being accused of Herman Cain, but nonetheless, the descriptions of Cain's accusers are just eerily similar to what I actually put out in 2008 regarding Barack Obama. It was a matter of performing oral sex, at which time, once the deed was completed, we continued to just bullshit for a little while, drive around for a little while, drinking in the car. About 45 minutes to an hour after the fact, I had made it clear that I was ready to go back to the hotel because I had had a long day and a long night the night before. So the limo driver had suggested that it would be easier for him to actually drive me back to the hotel in Gurnee, and then he would take and drop off Obama. I had no problem with that. I wasn't being charged for the extra mileage or time for it. So I was taken back to the Comfort Inn and Suites in Gurnee, Illinois. I was dropped off. I did take care of the expense report as far as paying off for the time used. I signed off on the credit card slip, said goodnight. I told them it was a pleasure meeting him. Maybe, we'd run into each other again one day. I went back to my hotel room, thinking nothing of it. The following day, there's a knock at my hotel room door, and I opened the door, and none other than the same one, Barack Obama, standing there at my hotel room door, offering me yet more Coke, and I had made it clear that I still had some from the 8 Ball the night before.
Larry, we have to go to a break in a couple of minutes, but
okay.
I just wanted to back up for a minute and ask you, when you were introduced to him, what name did he tell you to call him by? What first name?
Actually, he didn't. The driver introduced him to me as Barack Obama.
So you did call him Barack?
Yes, I did.
I was curious if he had told you
he was using Barry.
Anyway. Yeah. I was interested. I was just wondering.
Yeah, no,
okay,
actually, but no, I mean, it was almost something like, you go somewhere, kind of like a trip to Vegas. Everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. The guy goes to Vegas, he gets drunk, he buys a hooker or whatever. He wakes up the next day and he realizes that his wallet's been stolen, or she lifted his watch or whatever. It was similar to that feeling, only the only reason that he would have ever shown up at the hotel was to have gotten the room number from the driver.
I want to remind people again that, Sharon Bialik said that Herman Cain met her for breakfast or met her at some Italian restaurant, and then they got into a car and they did whatever. And Gloria Allred had a press conference and told the whole world that everyone has to believe her account of that when there's nothing that corroborates any of it. And here you are, and you have a tale of you opening up your door, and Barack Obama is standing there and wants to do drugs with you in your hotel room. So how can we be told that we have to believe the person who's accusing the Republican, but we can't believe you?
Well, I guess, and you're right. And here's the interesting part. When you talk about the current media standard, the very same so-called news organization that published the very first accusations against Herman Cain is the very same so-called news organization that published the hit piece on June 18th of 2008. And not because they had anything to substantiate it, but because the reporter working for that so-called news agency, one Ben Smith of Politico, was a client of an attorney with the Public Citizens Litigation Group who just happened to be representing 3 anonymous bloggers who were defendants in a defamation suit brought by me in the District of Columbia over their intentional and deliberate stories saying that I was in a psychiatric hospital in Texas at the time I claimed that I was in Chicago with Barack Obama. They didn't say that this is what they heard. They actually made those allegations. They continued to move on by saying that I had been accused of attempting to extort $100,000 from the Barack Obama campaign. And this story was actually put out by one Bill Burton, who was the deputy press secretary for one President Barack Obama. And he was also a communications spokesperson for Obama for America. So what people need to understand is it's not just the double standard. I mean, there are people who are trying to protect their own attacks of people. Ben Smith put this article out. He accused me of having a 27-year rap sheet, which, if you look at my record, you cannot find a criminal conviction against me post-1987 when I pled guilty to charges that I was accused of. All right.
And what were those charges? What were those charges?
Unauthorized use of a financial transaction device and second-degree forgery. Those are the exact same charges as they read on the Colorado
and was that the
statute?
only thing that you've been? Was that the only thing that you've had on your criminal record?
Oh, no. 87 was the last time I've ever pled guilty to anything that I've done, because I haven't been accused of doing anything that I actually did since then. No, my record actually starts from 1980. Contrary to Mr. Smith's account, I was originally accused of theft by check. In other words, buying clothes from a store in Cherry Creek, a posh shopping district in Denver, Colorado, in 1980, using a check that I had no funds in. Okay, I did plead guilty to that. I was given 4 years unsupervised probation. I was returned to Arizona, where I was doing a 4-year sentence for pleading guilty to second-degree forgery, which I did. Okay, I did 1 year and a day in Florida for, again, theft by check, and I pled guilty to theft by check. And
you have not, from day one, denied that you had a criminal history, that there were things in your past that you've done. It wasn't like you were trying to hide it or keep anyone from knowing about it, but according to the left, anyone, regardless of their background, when they accuse a public figure or someone on the right of something, it doesn't matter what's in their background. Like the Duke rape accuser, she was a prostitute. She was a drug user. That did not matter to the press. They still went with her story that she was raped, even though it turned out not to be true. So I just wanted to put that out there, that even based on the left standard, your background should have had nothing to do with your story. But, Larry, can we get back to the hotel room when you say Barack Obama showed up again the next day?
Mm-hmm.
What happened when he showed up with more drugs?
Basically, it was he made it clear that he had come back to be serviced yet again, which I did not have a problem with. It was all of maybe 1 hour in total time between the time he arrived and the time he left. He himself made himself comfortable on the bed. Again, there was drugs used by both parties. And, again, it was another one of those quick wham, bam, thank you, ma'am type things that, you know, you see in movies from, like, when people go off to Vegas or something.
Did you have any kind of conversation? Was there any talking? Do you remember what it was about? Anything?
There was not that much talking. He did, in fact, make it clear that he had come back because he actually had enjoyed the events of the previous evening.
Did you notice if he was wearing a wedding ring?
You know what? I wouldn't have noticed because that's something I've never looked at. I do believe that he had, in fact, said he was married. That would not have affected me whatsoever.